Okay guys, so welcome back again. So in this video, we'll be talking about cloud functions for Firebase. So the first question is that what are cloud functions? So basically cloud functions provide you with serverless framework to automatically run your backend code or your microservices in response to events that are triggered by HTTPS request or certain events triggered by your Firebase project. That is, for example, if a user registers inside your Firebase project, that is, if you are using Firebase Authentication, then you can trigger a function when a user registers or when a user is deleted from your Firebase Authentication system. And similarly, we can also trigger events whenever we write documents inside our Firestore database. That is, in case if you are using Firestore database as a database for your project, then we can also trigger functions. And moreover, we can create scheduled functions like cron jobs that run at a particular interval of time or at a certain date and time. So without wasting any time, let's dive into our code and let's see that how do we create these cloud functions. So let's go to our terminal. And here we see that we are inside this directory called fire functions. So currently it is an empty directory as we can see here. So let me clear out the console once again. So the first thing you need to do is to install Firebase tools globally on your system. So for that, what you need to do, you need to simply do npm install -g Firebase-tools to install Firebase tools, or that is the Firebase CLI globally on your system. But I am not doing it because it is already installed. So let me stop it. And now to check whether the tools have been installed successfully, what you can do, you can simply type in Firebase -version to check the Firebase version CLI you are running on your system. So here I am on 9.6.1. So now the next step is to authenticate ourselves with Firebase. So how do we do it? It is very simple. We simply need to do Firebase login, simply like this. And as we can see that I am currently logged in with this user. So let me show you the login process. For that, I need to log out here first. So Firebase logout. And now I'll do Firebase login again. So Firebase login again. And now let's see that what will happen. And now it asks us whether we want error reporting. So let me simply press no here, and a tab will open in our browser. And here you need to choose an account to continue to Firebase. So here let me choose my account. And now it would be completed in a moment. And now we simply need to click on allow. And now our login is successful. So we can close this tab and we can go back. And now we see that we are getting this message here that is successfully logged in with this user ID. That is with this email. So now let me again clear out the console here. And now what we'll do, we'll create a new project inside our Firebase console. And this is the same console with the same user, that is with the same email address. So here what we need to do, we simply need to add a new project here. So let me simply click add project. And here we can provide in the name of the project. So let's simply call it Firebase functions. Simply like this. And now let's click on continue. And we do not want to enable Google Analytics here. So let me uncheck this thing here. And now let's simply click on create project. And now it will take a moment or so to create your project. So now the project is ready. So let's click on continue once again. And now we are inside our project here. And if we click here inside functions, we see that our functions, there are no functions inside this functions tab here. So let's set up our functions here inside this project. So how do we do it? Let's go back to our terminal here. And here we are inside this directory called fire functions. And this can be any empty directory inside your system. So if we ls here, the directory is empty. So firstly, what we need to do, we simply need to do Firebase init, simply to initialize a new Firebase project inside this directory that is called fire functions. So now let's press enter. And now it asks us that what all features, that is what all Firebase features we want to implement inside this project. So since we are only interested in functions, so let's go select this functions and let's simply press spacebar to select functions here. Though you can use other features also, that is you can also deploy rules for your Firestore database here. But currently we are only interested in functions here. So let's simply select functions and let's press enter. And now it asks us to select a project. So we can use an existing project or we can create a new project. But since we already created a project right now, that is this Firebase functions, so we'll use this project. So let's simply select this thing here, that is use an existing project. And now it gives us a list of projects inside our Firebase dashboard. So here what we need to select, we need to select this project, that is Firebase functions. So now let's simply press enter here. And now our project would be set up in a moment. So now we need to select the language which we want to use inside our cloud functions. that are to write our cloud functions. So for this, I am going to select JavaScript. So let's select it. And now, do we want to force ESLint? So we'll select no. And I would highly recommend you to select no here if you don't know that what ESLint is for. So let's simply select N here, that is no. And then we want to install the dependencies. Yes, obviously we do want, though it only installs two dependencies, that is the Firebase functions and the Firebase admin SDK. So now the initialization is complete, and now let's clear out the console here and let's open a VS Code here. So here we see that we have these three files and this functions folder here. So we have this firebase.json file, which is currently an empty file. We have the .getignore files. It is only for get purposes. So if we have a look at this Firebase source file, that is Firebase RC file, we see that here we have the projects, and the default project is this Fire Functions project. And now let's have a look at this functions folder. And here inside this functions folder, we have a couple of files. That is the node modules folder, that is typically used inside Node.js applications. And then again, we have a getignore file. Then we have the index.js file, a package.json file, and a package.json file. So if we have a look at this package.json file, we see that we only have two dependencies here. That is the Firebase admin, that is the admin SDK, and the Firebase functions dependency, that is Firebase functions. So now let's have a look at this index.js file. And here we see that functions is imported, or this it is required from Firebase functions, that is the dependency here. So now before writing any function, what I'll do, I'll start my emulator, that is the Firebase emulator, locally on our system, because it is super handy and it is super easy to use Firebase emulator whenever you are in development mode and you are trying to create functions. So for that, what we need to do, we need to go back to our project here, that is inside the root folder of our project. So here what we need to do, we need to simply do Firebase init emulators, simply like this, and let's press enter. And now it asks us that what all emulators do we want to have. So we want to have an authentication emulator because we want to see how a function is triggered whenever someone authenticates with our application. So therefore we want an authentication emulator also. We want the functions emulator and the Firestore emulator and the PubSub emulator. So now let's simply press enter. And now it asks us port for each of the emulators. So you can simply press enter, enter, enter again and again, because it will take the default ports for the emulator to run. And now it asks us whether we want to enable the emulator UI. Of course we do. So let's press Y. And now for the emulator UI, let's leave an empty port to choose any available port. So do we like to download the emulators? So yes, we do want to download the emulators. And now the emulators have been downloaded. So now how to start the emulator? We simply need to do Firebase emulators :start. So now let's press enter, and in a moment our emulators would be up and running and we'll be seeing them inside our browser. So we see that the emulators are up and running. So we can visit this URL, that is localhost port 4000. And we see that our emulator is up and running, and we have the authentication emulator, we have the Firestore emulator, the functions emulator, and the PubSub emulator. And this emulator is mostly used for scheduled functions. So if we go to the authentication emulator, we can add a user here, and let's go back. And if we view the logs here, that is the functions emulator, we'll be seeing that what all functions we have deployed here. So now let's go back to our VS Code, and here what I'm going to do, I'm going to write a very simple first function which triggers on an HTTPS request. So for that, what we need to do, we simply need to export a function here, that is exports dot and the name of the function. So let's call our function hello world, simply like this, and then this should be equal to functions, and this functions is required at the top here. And then .https, because we are handling the HTTP functions. And then here we have a method or a function that is on request. And here we have the typical request and response handler, simply like this. And these functions which you write here, that is inside this on request thing, they basically follow the Express.js type of syntax. So here what we can do, here we can simply send back a response. So res.send, and here we can simply say hello from Firebase function, simply like this, and there should be no W in hello. So now let's save this, and this is the request object and this is the response object. So we have saved this function, and let's go back we see that our function is initialized at this URL. That is, in HTTP function is initialized, and this all we are seeing inside the logcat here. So we see that our function hello world is deployed to this URL, that is HTTP localhost port 5001 and something something something. So let's click here and let's go to this URL. So let's see. So we see here that we are getting this message here, that is hello from Firebase function. So if we open the emulator suite also, so we see here also that is HTTP function is initialized and the URL is this URL. So now you know that how to write a very simple HTTPS function. So let's take it one step further. So now what if you want to handle other type of requests, that is other type of HTTP request, because currently we were only handling the GET request. That is, whenever you make a request to a URL inside a browser, it typically sends a GET request. So how can you handle a post request, a delete request, a put or patch request? It is pretty simple to do. So what you can do, you can simply do it like this. That is, again I'm creating a new function here just to be explicit. So let's call it mapi, or let's call it API, simply like this. This should be equal to again functions.https.onRequest, and here we have the request comma response, and this should be in parentheses, simply like this. And here we can use the switch statement to select the case depending on the type of HTTP request that is made to this URL. So we can use switch, and here we can switch to request.method, simply like this. And then here we'll have our cases, that is case 1 would be get request like this, and then we can simply break here, that is break like this, and here we can simply send back a response. So rest.send, and let's simply send back that get request, that is it was a get request, simply like this. So let me write it here that it was a get request. And now let's simply create other cases also. So now let me simply copy this case from here and let's create other 2 cases or 3 cases. So this should be a post request, and we can change this get to post, simply like this, or we'll do something else inside this post request, but let it be for now. And here we can simply call it a delete request, that is an HTTP delete request, and let's simply paste delete here. And then we also have a default case, that is to handle other cases as well. So here we can simply say rest.send, it was a default request, simply like this. And now inside this post request, what I want is that I want to send the incoming post request body back to the client. Instead of simply sending back it was a post request, what we can do, we can have the body, that is the request body, or we can extract the request body like this. So we can say const body equal to request.body, simply like this. And if you are coming from the Express.js background, then this should be very familiar to you. That is, this is how we handle request body inside Express applications. So here what we can do, here we can simply send back body, simply like this. If we save this file here and if we go back here inside our terminal, we see that this function, that is API function, is already deployed on our local host. And if we visit this URL, we see that we are getting this message, that is it was a get request. So let's see that how do we see other kinds of requests. So for that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new file inside my functions folder, and I'm using this package here, that is this, I'm using this package here, that is this extension inside VS Code, that is called REST client. And basically it allows us to make API calls using different kinds of HTTP verbs, that is get, post, put, patch and delete, and we do not need to leave our terminal here to check our API. So let's close this from here, and for this to work, what we need to do, we need to create a new file inside the functions folder. So let's cd into the functions folder, and now I'll create a new file here that is called rest.http, simply like this. And now we can close this terminal here, and now we have this file that is rest.http, and here we can simply write our get request. So the request would be get, and the URL we can get it from here, that is this is the URL. So let me simply copy the URL, and let's go back here inside our terminal or inside VS Code, and let's paste it here, and let's simply make a get request. So we see that we are getting this message here, that is it was a get request. So similarly we can also make a post request. So let me copy the URL again, and let's simply paste it here. So let me paste it here, and this should be a post request. And now to separate this get and post request, we need to use 3 hashes. And now for post request, let's simply send in a content type header. So content type would be application JSON. That is the type of request body we are sending. And here we can simply say name would be truly Mithal, like this. And here we can also provide in college, and the college would be IIT Guwahati, simply like this. And let's simply send a post request to this URL, that is to the function. So let me make a request here. We see that we are getting back this response back, that is coming from request.body, because if we have a look at index.js file, we see that inside the post request we are simply sending back the body, that is request.body. So now let's close this. And now we can also make a delete request. So let me simply copy this again and let's paste it here. And now let's separate it. And this should be a delete request. And let me paste it one more time. And let me paste it one more time. And this should be a put request or a patch request, whatever you want to have. So now let me simply send this request, that is a delete request. So we are getting back a response. It was a delete request. And if we simply make a put request, we'll be getting the default response back. So as we can see here, that is inside the default case, we are simply sending back that it was a default request. So this is how we handle different type of HTTP verbs inside your cloud functions. And moreover, we can use a whole express application inside cloud functions also. And not in this video, I'm talking about that how do you handle express application inside cloud functions. But this is how you can handle simple things. And now let me show you one more thing, that is you can use each and every NPM package inside cloud functions. So for that, we are inside the functions folder here. So let me clear out here. And if we do ls here, we are inside this functions folder. So that is inside this functions folder, not in the root folder of our Firebase project, but inside the functions folder. And here what we can do, we can install any NPM dependency here. So for simplicity, let me simply install a dependency called Axios like this. So let's simply do npm i Axios. And now we have this dependency inside our package.json file, as we can see. And now we can use this dependency to make a GET request to another URL. So firstly, let me simply require Axios at the top here. And here this should be equal to require Axios. And now inside the GET request, we were simply sending back a GET request. But instead, what we want to send back, we want to call a URL. That is, we want to call this URL. That is placeholder API. And we want to get this user from this API. And this is a public URL, that is jsonplaceholder.ipcode.com, which is a fake REST API for testing purposes. So I'm using this API. And here to this URL, I want to make a GET request to get this JSON back from this API. And then we want to send it back to the client using our functions. So here what we can do, we can simply say const response equal to await axios dot get. And here we need to pass in the URL. And since we are using await here, we need to mark this function as async. So let's mark it as async function. And here, instead of sending back a single string here, what we need to send, we simply need to send response.data, because in Axios, the response.data thing contains the actual JSON that is coming back from the API. So if we save this, and if we go to this URL, that is this URL, that is our API URL. So let's open this URL. So we see that we are getting back this response that is coming from the placeholder API. Though we did not call this API directly, but instead we called our function, and our function made a request to this API, and then that response from the API has been sent back to the client. So I think you know that what I meant here. So this is how you can handle HTTP requests inside your functions. So now let's have a look at something else, and that is how do we handle events triggered from Firebase features. So let's go to our overview here. And now here what I'll do, I'll simply go to this authentication emulator. And here what I'll do, I'll simply try to add a user here. So let the display name be John Doe, and let his email be johndoe@gmail.com, and password would be 123456. So let's simply save this. So now we see that we have this user here inside our Firebase emulator. So what we wanted here is that whenever a user is created, either inside Firebase console or a client, that is your Firebase client, is creating a user, or a user tries to register on your site, we want to have a function to be triggered so that we can send a welcome email to that user. So how do we do it? It is pretty simple to do. We need to go back to our index.js file that is inside the functions folder. And here what we'll do, we'll export another function here. So we'll simply say exports dot, and again you need to provide in a function name. And here I'm simply providing in a function name that is called user added. Simply like this. This is the name of the function. And then what we have here, we have the functions dot auth dot user dot on create and on delete. So we want to handle the on create event, and here what we have, we simply have the user that is created inside your Firebase authentication system. So here what you can do, we can simply write in console dot log user created, or let me use backticks here, and let me use the template string here, that is user dot email is created, simply like this. And here what we need to do, we need to return something, and here we need to resolve the promise. So we can simply say return promise dot resolve, simply like this. And similarly, we have an event for on delete event of the user. So let's simply copy this function here and let's simply paste it here, and this function's name would be user deleted, simply like this. So that in case the user is deleted, you can send him an email that why have you deleted your account from our project. So you can do something like that. And here we can simply say user.email deleted, simply like this. And instead of the on create event, we have the on delete event here, simply like this. So let's save this thing from here, and let's go back to our Firebase emulator here. And if we go to our terminal here, we see that two more functions have been initialized. That is the auth functions, that is user added and user deleted. So let's see that in console here. That is firstly what I'm going to do. I'm going to add in a user again. So the display name would be truly method. And let's provide in an email here. So let me simply provide in my email here. So at gmail.com, password would be 123456. So let's save it. And we see that a user is created here. But if we go to our terminal here, we see that trulymethod@gmail.com is created. And this is coming from this function here, that is user added function. So now let's try to delete a user. So let's try to delete John Doe. So let's simply click here and let's delete it. So let's simply click delete here. And if we go back to our terminal, we see that johndoe@gmail.com is deleted. And this all is happening locally on our system. But once we deploy the functions to our Firebase project, then these functions would also be triggered on your production environment. So now let's see that how do we trigger events on Firestore collections. So for that, what we need to have, we need to export more functions here, that is on Firebase collection events. So here what we can do, we can again export function here, that is exports.document, or let's simply say fruit added, simply like this, because we want to name our collection fruits. So this should be again equal to functions.firestore.document, and here we need to provide in the path of the document. So here I'm going to call my collection name fruit, so I'm calling it like this, and then we have the document ID, simply like this. And then inside this document, we have these kind of options, or these four functions, that is on create, on delete, on update, on write. So let's handle each of the functions. So here what I'll say, on create, and then what we have here, we have the snapshot and the context. So we'll have the snapshot here and the context like this. And then we can do anything we want to do whenever a document is created inside this fruits collection. So here what we can do, we can simply log in the snapshot data. So we can simply say console.log snapshot.data, simply like this. And then we can simply return something here. And here we can simply again return promise.resolve, simply like this. So let's save this. And if we go to our Firebase emulator, and if we try to create this collection called fruits, and if we try to add a document inside this fruits collection, then this function should be triggered. So let's go here, and we see that this function, that is fruit added, has been initialized as a Firestore function. So let's go here inside our emulator, and let's go to Firestore, and let's start a collection here. So the collection name should be fruits, because only then that function should be triggered. So let's click on next. Let me provide in a field name here, and the value would be mango. So let's save this. So we see that we have this document called with this document ID, and these are the fields. So if we go to our terminal here, we see that we are getting this thing here, that is name mango, and this is coming from snapshot.data. So let's quickly try to handle the other two types of functions, that is the on update function and on delete functions. So let me simply copy this function from here and let me paste it here, and this should be fruit deleted, simply like this. And then instead of the on create thing, we have the on delete event like this. And then again, what we can do, we can simply log this thing here, that is this item is deleted. And again, we can copy this function from here and let me paste it here. And instead of the deleted event, we want to have the updated event, that is if the document is updated. And instead of the on delete, we have the on update event, that is on update function here. So let's save these things here, and this should be, instead of deleted, it should be updated, simply like this. Or what more we can do inside this updated function, we can simply log in the before and after values. So we can say console.log, and here we can say that before, like this, and here we can simply get the before value using snapshot.before.data like this. And let's copy this thing and let's paste it here, and this should be after, that is after updation, and this should be after, simply like this. So let's save this and let's go back here to our terminal. So we see that two functions have been added here, that is fruit deleted and fruit updated. So firstly, let's try the updated event. So let's go back to our emulator. Let's try to change this name from mango to banana. So let's click here, let's change this mango to banana. Let's save this. So this has been updated, and if we go to our console, we see that the before snapshot was this thing here, that is name mango, and after snapshot was this thing here, that is name banana. So now let's try to delete this document. So let's simply click here and let's simply delete document. So let's click on delete. So the document is deleted, and if we go to our terminal, we see that this name banana has been deleted. So this is how you handle events from Firestore. So now let's see the last type of functions, and that are scheduled functions. So for that, what you need to do, we need to export one more type of function, and here I'm simply calling it scheduled function. So scheduled function, and this name can be any name. So here to create a scheduled function, what you need to do, you need to simply use functions.pubsub.schedule, and here you can pass in two types of things. Firstly, you can pass in the app engine YAML strings, or you can pass in the cron expression. So to run a function every minute, let me simply pass in 5 stars. That is to run a function every minute. And then we have the on run event here. And here inside this thing here, we have the context, simply like this. And here what we can simply log, here, that is I am running at every minute. So we can simply log it here, that is console.log, that is I am running or executing every minute, simply like this. And then you simply need to return something here, and we can return null from here. So let's save this. So if you don't know that how to write cron expressions, then you can go to this site here, that is crontab.guru, and here you can find simple examples of writing cron expressions. So 5 stars means that is to run at every minute. If you click on examples here, we see that we have many more cron expressions. That is, if we want to run a cron job every 5 minutes, we can simply click here and we can see that what should the expression be like. So you can simply copy it and you can simply paste it inside your scheduled function here. That is inside this string. So now let's save this. And if we go to our console here or inside our terminal, we see that this pubsub function is initialized. But this is not firing every minute, and that is a glitch inside this Firebase emulator. That is, we cannot fire pubsub scheduled functions inside our emulator. So for that, we need to deploy our project to Firebase console. So let's see that how do we deploy our functions to Firebase console. That is our Firebase project. That is the project that we have created here. Because if we go to the functions tab here, and if we reload the page, then we should not be seeing any functions inside this functions tab here, because the functions have not been deployed. They were only running locally on our system. So let's see that how do we deploy them. So let's go back and let's open our terminal here, and let me clear out here. And here what we need to do, we need to go to the root folder. So let's clear out, And what we need to do, we need to simply say Firebase deploy, simply like this. But in case you only want to deploy functions, then you can simply say only functions. Because we know that when we initialize this project, we could have initialized other things also apart from functions, like rules for Firestore, rules for authentication, rules for storage. But if you only want to deploy functions, then you can simply pass in this thing here, that is Firebase deploy only functions. And moreover, if you only want to deploy a single functions, that is, if you only want to deploy this hello world function and not the others, then you can simply use colon and you can simply pass in the name of the function. That is simply like this. So then only this function would be deployed and not others would be deployed. But here I want to deploy all the functions. So let's simply remove this colon and hello world from here. And now let me simply press enter. And most likely it should give me an error here. So let's wait for a couple of seconds. And let's see the error, what the error is. And we see this thing here, that is we are getting an error, and the error is very simple to fix. That is, our project should be on the Blaze plan, that is pay as you go plan, to deploy our functions. So if we go to our project here, we see at the down here that we are on the Spark plan, that is the free plan. So we need to upgrade this project to use the Blaze plan. So let's simply click on upgrade here. And here we need to select this plan, that is Blaze pay as you go. So let's simply select this plan and we need to purchase it. So now we see that we have successfully upgraded our project. So let's simply click cross here. And now we are on the Blaze plan. And most likely that if you haven't set up billing on your Firebase console or inside your Google platform, then you must be getting some pop-ups to enter your credit card information and so on and so forth. And then you can upgrade to the Blaze plan. So let's go back and now we are on the Blaze plan. So we won't be getting this error. So let's simply clear out the console here. And now let's simply use this command again, that is Firebase deploy only functions. And now it should take a couple of minutes to deploy each and every function of yours to Firebase project. So while it is deploying, why not let's go to our project here and let's enable some things here. That is, we need to check for authentication. So let's enable authentication here, because we haven't enabled authentication inside this project. So let's simply click on get started and we need to enable the email and password authentication. So let's click here. Let's simply enable the email password authentication. And this trigger, that is the Firebase function on authentication triggers, would be triggered on any of the sign-in providers. But here I am simply using the email and password provider. So let's now go to the cloud store, that is Cloud Firestore, and let's enable this database also, that is Cloud Firestore. And now let's simply click create database and we need to start it in test mode so that there should be, so that the rules are not there, that is it should be open to everyone. So let's simply click on next and here let me simply enable it and it would take a couple of minutes. So why not let's go back and let's see the deployment in progress of the functions. So it is still deploying. So let's again go back and let's set up the Firebase project, or let's create a document inside our Firestore collection while the functions are deploying. So we see that we have this Cloud Firestore. So let's simply start a collection here called fruits. And now let's click on next. And here let's simply use an auto ID and the name would be this thing here, that is a field name. And the value would be mango because I love mangoes. So let's simply save this. And we have this document inside our Firestore collection here. And now let's go to the authentication tab and let's add in a user here. So let the email be johndoe@gmail.com. Password would be 123456. So let's simply add in a user here. And now we have this user here. And now if we go back, we see that this function deployment is still in progress. So let's wait and let's go to this functions here and let's see that what all functions have been deployed till now. So we see that these functions have been deployed. That is the API, the hello world function have been deployed, and this is the URL. So let me zoom in a little bit. So we see that this is the URL for this function. So let's simply double click it and let's simply copy it, or let's simply go to this URL, that is hello world. So we see that your client does not have permission from this server. So why is it so? So let's wait for a couple of more minutes. Let's try this function, that is this URL. So let's go to this URL, that is API. And we see that this API call is working. That is, we are making a get request to this URL to our API and we are getting back this response. That in turn comes from the JSON API placeholder. So let's copy this URL and let's go back and let's try to use this URL inside our REST client and let's try to make a post request to this URL. So let me paste this thing here, and this is a live URL and not a localhost URL, but this is a live URL. So let's make a post request with these fields as the body. So let's make a request. So we see that we are getting back this response back. That is the request.body thing here. So if we make a delete request here by using the same URL, we should be getting that it was a delete request. And now let me simply make a put request here by using the same URL. And we see that it was a default request. So this URL is working. That is the API URL. So now let's try the hello world. But before that, let's go back and let's see that what is the problem here. So we see that we have successfully deployed this hello world, fruit updated, user deleted, fruit deleted, scheduled functions, fruit added. So we have some functions error here, that is Firebase deploy had errors with the following function, that is scheduled function. So we'll try to redeploy that scheduled function. So let's see that what's the problem there. So we'll fix that in a moment, but let's see that how other functions are working. So now let's try to go to the hello world URL. So let's go to this URL and we see that we are getting back this response, that is hello from Firebase function. So this is also working. So now let's go to the logs here and let me open this authentication thing in another tab, and let me also open this Cloud Firestore in another tab. So we have the Firebase logs here, and let me minimize it. So let's go to this thing here, that is this authentication thing here, and let's try to add in one more user here. The user's email would be trulymittal@gmail.com. Password would be 123456. So let's simply add in a user. And now at the very same time, what I'm going to do, I'm simply going to delete this John Doe user so that we can see both the log statements at the same time. That is, we have two events, that is the on user created event and on delete event. So let's delete this account, that is johndoe@gmail.com. So let's simply delete it. So the account has been deleted. So let's go to the logcat of our Firebase functions. So here we see that the function is not triggered yet, and it takes a moment or so to trigger a function. So we see that we get this message here, that is trulymittal@gmail.com is created and the function execution started, and the function execution took so many milliseconds. So let's see this thing also, that is after a few seconds or a couple of seconds, we have this log message also, that is johndoe@gmail.com is deleted. So we see that both the functions have been called as soon as we added and deleted a user from our authentication system. So let's go to this Cloud Firestore and let's try to add in a document. So let's try to add in a document. The name would be name, field name would be name, the value would be banana. So let's save this. Let's go to the mango field here, or the mango document here. Let's try to update the field name or the value from mango to grapes. Let's update it. And here for this banana field or this banana document, let me try to delete this document. That is this document which has a field and value with name and banana. So let's simply delete this document so that we can see all the three functions in progress. So let's go back to our logcat here, and it would take a couple of seconds. So we see that we have added a fruit. The name was banana. Then we updated a fruit, that is before was mango and after was grapes. So we have this event. So the delete event is yet to fire. That is the document deleted event. So now we have the deleted event also, that is name banana has been deleted. So now we see that all our functions are working, but only the pubsub function is not working. That is a scheduled function. So let's go back and let's try to redeploy the function. So we see that we can use this statement, that is Firebase deploy only functions scheduled function. So now to redeploy this function, that is scheduled function, what we can do, we can simply use this thing here, that is Firebase deploy only functions, and here we can simply pass in the name of the function, that is scheduled function. Simply like this, to only deploy this function, that is the scheduled function. So let's simply press enter and let's wait for a couple of seconds, and let's see that if we are able to deploy this function this time. Most likely this time the function should be deployed. So let's cross our fingers and let's wait. So let's go back here and let's have a look at the functions tab here once again, and let's see that what is happening here. And we see that we have a scheduled function here, and this should be a successful operation. And let's have a look at the logs here, because we are only going to see the log messages from the function, that is scheduled function. So yes, we see that our scheduled function is deployed, and we see that we have a message here, or a log message here, that is I am running or executing every minute. And that was the log statement inside our scheduled function, and it executed at 9:42.02 and it should execute at 9:43.03. So let's wait for a minute, and we see that we should be getting that message also. So it should be in a moment or so that we should be getting this message again. So let's go back once again to our terminal. So we see that we have this thing here, that is deploy complete. So we have successfully deployed our scheduled function, though we already verified that inside our Firebase console. But here also we see that we have this deploy complete. So let's go back, and it should take a moment or so for the scheduled function to trigger again. So we see that we get this trigger again, that is scheduled function I am running or executing every minute at 9:43:01. The first one was 9:42:02 and it is 9:43:01. So this is how we deploy our functions to our Firebase project, and this function, that is the scheduled function, would keep on running every minute until and unless you stop it. So how do you stop a function? So it is very simple. You can simply click on the 3 ellipses here, and here you can simply click on delete function, or what you can do, you can go back to your project, and here to delete each and every function which you don't want inside your Firebase project, you can simply comment those functions out from there. So here I'll simply comment out each and every function. So let me minimize this thing from here, and I'll only keep this function available, that is hello world, so that only hello world should be deployed and all the other functions should be deleted. And here what we need to do, we simply need to use the same command, that is Firebase. So let me clear out the console first. So Firebase deploy only functions, and let's press enter, and it would ask you that whether you want to delete all the other functions. So it would take a moment or so. So we see that we are getting this message here, that is these functions should be deleted. So whether we want to proceed with deletion of the functions, so let's press Y and enter. So now it is deleting these functions, that is apart from this hello world function. So we see that we are getting this message here, that is successful delete operation for each of the functions apart from this hello world function. And let's wait for a couple of seconds, or let's go back to our console here and let's try to reload this page, that is functions. And most likely the functions have been deleted here. So we see that only hello world remains here and it is up and working. So we can verify it also, that is this is up and working. And now let's go back and let's check the terminal here. So this deployment should be complete in a moment or so. But you got the point that how do you remove functions? So let's try removing this function as well from the Firebase console. So let's simply click on this ellipses here, that is the vertical ellipses, and let's simply click on delete function. So let's click on here and let's simply delete the function here. And now we see that our functions tab is empty because we do not have any functions inside the functions thing here. So this is how easy it was to create your own Firebase functions that can be triggered on HTTP request, on Firebase events like the authentication event, like the document added event or the deleted event inside your Firestore database, or you can write scheduled functions. So this is how easy it was. So if you have liked the video, do hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed to the channel till now, do subscribe to the channel. If you have liked the video and if you want to support me, you can support me on Patreon or PayPal. So thank you. Bye bye. Tata. Take care and have a good day and have a nice day.